Alrighty, so to get going, if you guys remember, we have been on a series specifically to give everybody in the team a little bit more understanding of what we do as a company and what are some of the strategies that we implement so that you can learn some of the key components of that, and then you become a beacon of light in our marketplace. So the idea here is basically threefold. Number one, we want you guys to fully understand what it is to invest in real estate and the variety of different strategies that are available. Number two, we want you to understand that these are some of the strategies that your company that you work for is implementing. And number three, the real picture here long-term for us is to inspire you so that as we're growing and expanding, you too will partake in doing some of these investment strategies to build long-term wealth. Now, if you continue in this process and you're learning your craft and you're a part of what we do, you also become a mentor as a result, so that when a customer calls you, you are literally teaching them why these are some of the key things you need to be careful for, why this deal doesn't quite make sense. And that's really the hope of this particular training. If you remember at the very beginning, we talked about fix and flip, we talked about wholesale, we talked about being a landlord and running the numbers as an income producing asset. And for those that you looked at, what's amazing about this series is everything that we've been teaching, we have actually been implementing. So the house we talked about for flip, we bought, it's already under contract for sale. The wholesaling that we talked about, we've actually got several properties under contract that we're wholesaling as a company. We talked about, of course, the rental properties, which we recently, in fact, we're still managing some of these projects, but we're working on a duplex that we're selling that has to do with cash flow. And so this next strategy that I'm going to talk about, it's a strategy that I consider to be in the higher risk, higher reward arena. However, this strategy is something that we also are doing. In fact, we're working on 2 projects. One is in St. Petersburg that we're analyzing to be able to implement this very strategy. So I'm sharing this with you again, because this is something as a company that we do. If somebody ever came to you and said, hey, what does your company do? Then you should be able to share very quickly what is it that the company is doing, right? Yeah. He says a lot. He actually is in property management. He'll be like, you mean we manage properties? No, all joking aside. So this strategy that we have here, guys, it's a very powerful strategy. And what's funny is I call this strategy the first flipper. And I'll talk about it in just a minute what that means. That strategy begins with ground up construction. Now, what we'll talk about today is, again, some of the key phases of ground up. We're going to talk a little bit about this strategy, but to kind of back up, there's a variety of different construction types that I want to clarify, because we're not going to go into every single one of them. You have commercial development, you have industrial development and construction, which is where you're building more commercial buildings, you're dealing with industrial. Then you have residential construction, which we're going to talk about that, but there's a difference between development and ground up construction. And what I mean by development is typically when you're saying development, it is an investor who's bought a certain piece of land with the plans to develop a community inside of that property. And that is a much more robust process. There's a lot of profit to be made, but a lot of risk and a lot of work that goes into being able to set up the utilities, set up the roads, get the permits approved, and ultimately start going vertical to build a community within the actual property. That developer is what I call the first flipper, because if you think about it, without those guys developing communities, you wouldn't be able to fix a house that is aged and resell it. So they initially were the first flipper, a very streamlined flipper that matter, that did volume, okay? I am sure that most of us live in a community, right, that somebody actually flipped a home by building that subdivision previously. So it's important to understand that all of our homes have been developed at some point or another. Now, with that said, the type of strategy that I'm going to talk about today, even though some of these processes that I'll talk about apply for development, the reality is I'm talking about infill lot construction. What does that mean? That means that the projects that we typically look for are with developments that already exist. They already have access to the city sewer and everything else. There's already a road built so that you mitigate the development side of the risk. So what you're basically doing is analyzing a lot that already has other homes within that subdivision that give you the ability to build a similar home in that community that you can sell for a profit, or in some cases where you can rent for cash flow, okay? So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to share with each and every one of you the keys, or should I say the key stages of construction. The first key stage of construction actually begins with what we call pre-development stage. Generally, in the pre-development stage, we also call it due diligence stage, because it's in this time that we're looking at this piece of land and we're starting to determine if this lot is indeed a good potential site to be able to build a home to generate a profit, whether it's a flip that you're going to sell the home or whether it's an actual rental property that you're going to build in the home, okay? Now, some of the items that are covered in this pre-development stage of due diligence is fully environmentals if they're necessary. Now, that typically happens in commercial property, but there have been some lots in certain communities that may have been right next to a major commercial plant, and that could also require that you have to do an environmental study. During this particular stage, you're studying the market and the feasibility of that particular property, as I just talked about. You're completing surveys if they're required by your lender to make sure that you have the proper site and that you actually have enough land to be able to build on it accordingly. So a lot of times when you're working with a builder, they'll even during that survey of the site, they'll actually start figuring out what angle or how they're going to structure the actual property or the tie-in to the road and so forth. So that survey can be very important. Another thing that you're going to look at is, of course, is if you haven't already, you're going to be acquiring the land and or the option to purchase land, which is actually a big strategy that a lot of builders will do. I remember back in 2007 and 8, we were working with an actual investment company and they were actual builders, but they didn't have the money to develop full communities. So they went to these areas like Northport, Florida, and other markets like that, and they went to these subdivisions that were owned by individual owners. Instead of buying all the land during their due diligence period, what they did is they put a $500 option to buy it at a certain price for about 6 to 12 months, which was a genius strategy. So I'm going to pause here to share that strategy with you. So here they are individually putting these properties under contract, or technically an option to buy them so that they can do their due diligence. Simultaneously, because they've already vetted the community, they have floor plans already built out. So they started going to investors like us and saying, hey, I have a lot and I have a home and this is what it will cost to build. And they actually started turning profit from day one doing that strategy. So it's a very effective strategy. Now, again, that usually happens during due diligence, which is typically when you're going to see the actual acquiring of the land or putting an option agreement, which is what I'm referring to here. This is the period of time, of course, when you're working with a builder where the site plans and the development plans begin to take form. What you find out is a 2,000 square foot house that we can build here. What's the maximum allowable option that we have here? Is this a 1,200 square foot home? Is this a 5,000 square foot home? That site plan begins to be developed. Of course, during that stage, most investors, after they purchase the land, will be acquiring the necessary permits because, as we know, to go vertical, you have to have the city's approval to be able to build that home. And so again, having the site plans and working on that is what this stage is all about. From there, if they're working through construction ground up, what typically will happen is they'll begin to arrange a financing of construction. And as you guys know, even though right now we've paused the program, the reality is, as a lender, that's when people come to us typically, is usually during the pre-development stage. Now, some of them have already purchased the land, but now they're doing exactly this, arranging their finance to be able to go vertical, okay? And then the last part is making some infrastructure improvements. There might be some issues with the site that they have to fix. They might have to put some dirt to actually level the property. So again, these are the stages in pre-development that we look at. Now, the next stage of the development is, of course, what we call the actual construction stage. Now, this is when we start talking about going vertical. And as you'll see, it's a very straightforward process. They start developing the vertical structure. They start going on vertical. That's typically when a real estate investor, if they're going to sell the property or lease it, also begins their project marketing. Why? Because one of the benefits of going vertical is that if you have the site plans, if you have the drawings, and you start actually going vertical, you can start pre-marketing your property both for rent or sale. So it gives you plenty of time during the ground-up process to be able to start marketing the property, okay? From there, you start tapping into the construction financing, or what we call the draw process. That's where you start getting the money to draw and finish the construction that you're doing. Again, during that time, you're either going to be pre-leasing or pre-selling. What do I mean by that? Is that in many stages during construction, since you have the time to pre-market the property, many people, by the time the actual walls are up, even if the kitchen or nothing else has been finished, there's already a contract for somebody to buy the property or for somebody to lease it. And so again, that's one of the benefits of construction. If you're doing it right, then during this stage of construction, you can get to the pre-leasing or the pre-selling. And then of course, from that point, you're arranging for the property manager, or if you're going to hold it, for example, or arranging strategies with your actual agent that's selling your property, okay? So again, that's stage 2 is construction. Now, stage 3 in this particular process is what we call the operation. And what do I mean by operation is this is now the implementation. Now you're getting the CO, or so basically certificate of occupancy, right? And during that time is when you can really start putting together the pieces that are finished with the property. Now, if you haven't already sold the property, this is the time where you find a buyer, right? Or you find the tenant if you haven't, for whatever reason, been able to move the property quick enough. You're going to deal with ongoing marketing for sales or leasing. You're going to be dealing with determining a hold strategy if you're not going to sell the property. So that's a time where you would start breaking down the leases, the terms, and everything else that you need to offer for that. And then, of course, this is the ramping up of the property management in order to scale the property. Generally, when you're dealing with multifamily, by the time you start building, what they usually try to do is they build them in phases. And so within each phase of the construction, their team is already marketing to fill up 80 to 90% of those properties by the time they finish 100% of that building, and then they start moving on to the next. So again, it's the ramp up period to be able to get the property management in place for you to be able to scale. All right. And then of course, that's when you get to achieve the stabilization of the income, or at that point you sell the property and you generate your profit. So as you can see, guys, this process is not something that happens overnight. It takes time, it takes a period of time, and there's levels of risk throughout each stage of the construction process. This is the reason why we deem this to be what we call a higher risk, but higher reward. Because again, if you're funding a deal in the pre-construction stage, that pre-construction stage could take a year, depending on the permits. It could take 2 months. So if you've already invested and borrowed money from an investor from the very beginning, you can see the risk of having to carry that mortgage every single month to put yourself in a position where you're in danger, right? So that's the reason why when we're dealing with this business, you have to understand the stages. Now, most of our clients, or at least the ones that we work with, that we're comfortable funding. I have a client of mine, for example, who he and I were just talking, funny enough, about him building a beautiful house that he's going to do in Winter Garden. It's a beautiful home. He's got the plans, but because he understands the risk, when he was doing his due diligence and pre-construction, he negotiated the builder, he negotiated the land, everything else. He took it down, and now is where he's talking about getting financing. Why? Because he didn't want to get stuck paying for mortgage payments on a piece of land that he wasn't sure he was going to get permits. Now that he finally got the permits, now he's getting financing so that he can start going into construction. Everybody follow me so far? So that's really the reason why this is so important. As an investment company, this is what we like to do when we're looking at a deal that we're going to build from scratch. Now, as everybody knows, one of the biggest risks is who you partner with in the construction process. This is why when we're lending money, we're so selective on experience, and we're so selective also on the builder that you're working with. So what I'm going to talk about right now is when we're looking at picking the right builder as a company, or when we're funding somebody who has a builder, these are the pieces that we ask for. And I'm going to share with you what we do, but now you should understand that when we're lending money to somebody, when we're asking for these conditions, it is not because we have nothing to do and we're bored. It is because there's a purpose behind the process to make sure that we vet the right builder. And again, the reason why is because a builder can destroy a perfect project. And if you're not careful, everybody says, yes, I have a builder, but most of the people that come to us and say they have a builder have a contractor that only renovates homes, and that is a completely different process. You need to be able to work with a builder who knows how to build from scratch, who has a team in place to handle the process. So here's basically what the due diligence process using common sense looks like. First, and I'm going to break these key pieces down, and I'm sharing this with you again, not for your health, but because this is what we do as a company to protect ourselves and to protect our clients, okay? For instance, if I'm funding a deal that we're doing construction and we don't go through this process, later on our post-closing department gets stuck trying to pick up the mess and then dealing with all the stress of, oh my God, this guy's not producing. And we've seen this happen, guys. So this is why this is so important for us not to cut the corners during our due diligence. The first one is getting referrals from experts in the space. A lot of people say, Rick, what is the most effective way to get the right builder? Well, let me tell you, if you're working with somebody who's building a lot of homes, that person can give you a good referral with who their builder is. I generally go that route with referrals because generally that referral carries a lot more weight than if I go on Google and start trying to search for builders. Everybody with me? So that's the reality. So I would get with a professional that's already doing business, and then I would ask them to refer somebody to me. In fact, I'm working on a house in St. Pete. I don't have a builder in St. Petersburg, but we have an issue on a project that was mismanaged that we're working on. And guess what? The first thing I did was exactly that. I got with a professional who's been doing construction in that area. They referred me to a builder that within 24 hours of our meeting has already started giving me a proposal with breakdowns and timelines, which is exactly what I was looking for. Now, when you get that builder and you get that referral, it is important not to just take that word for, the person who referred you and just say, okay, well, perfect, that's gospel. That means 100% of what I'm doing, I'm gonna do because my friend told me this guy's great. The next step is get some references who have actually worked with them and contact them and ask them questions like, what are the pros and cons of working with this builder? Have they been on time? Have they completed every project? Have they stayed on budget? Are they insured? And then you will be amazed at how much great feedback you get from those people who actually work with the builder. That's one of the steps that I do. The next step that we do, and this is what we do on every single transaction that we're gonna do construction on or any major renovation, we use a third-party company, generally called Trinity, even though we have a couple others. And that company we hire to do a builder review. Now, what that process looks like is that they actually conduct a background check on the builder. They check that they're insured and they're bonded and licensed. They verify that there are no other pending complaints on other projects in the area. And they literally go through a full process and they give you a full assessment broken down. I think it's close to 20 pages long in order to tell you what are the pros and cons of this builder. Even to the point where a lot of times they won't even do the builder review until you give them the actual construction specs, because what they even want to confirm is that this builder has the capacity to build a big house instead of just doing the little house, for example. And so that's a very important process. So when people come and complain, you should say, I'm actually doing you a favor because I'm making sure that the builder you're about to partner with is able to accomplish what they tell you they can accomplish. And so again, the beautiful thing about this process is that now it removes you from the picture. I'm no longer the bad guy. Who's the bad guy? The third-party vendor is. I can't work with you because here's what he said. Or, hey, I was told we could work with you, but these are the 3 concerns. Can we address them? And that's one of the reasons why when we're vetting a contractor, we want to make sure that we do a builder review. Now, along with that, we'll also complete a project feasibility study, which again is a third-party company. What does that mean? That means that whenever we're going to analyze a deal to build in that area, sometimes we may be busy, we may not call the city, we may not call the county to find out if that HOA even allows for this type of home to be built in that community. So by hiring a third-party company to do a builder, a project feasibility study, what they do is they take all the specs from your builder, they contact the HOA, they contact the city, they contact the county, and they will come back to you with a full assessment and say, we believe this property perfectly matches this community, or we don't believe this property perfectly matches. In fact, the city won't allow the kind of exterior look that you're going for. In fact, they're shooting for bungalows, not necessarily modern homes. Things that, what if you try to build, now you just delayed 4 months of your process fighting with the city, right? So that's the reason why we want to make sure we have a feasibility study done. We've also had borrowers that came to us, and when we started this process, the actual feasibility study of the project comes back, and it's like, what are you talking about? The homes in this community are at least 4,000 square feet. You're trying to build a 1,200 square foot home. They won't even let you. First of all, what a waste of life. And so again, that feasibility study is super important for us investors to make sure that we didn't drop the ball somewhere or we didn't fully miss something that we could have missed. The next thing we do, and again, is with the third-party companies, even though we reviewed internally, is we review the complete scope of work. And ideally, I like to look at 3 bids, just so that I can gauge apples with apples and make sure that we're getting not only the best price, but that everything is completed. You will be amazed if you're doing a deal, how quickly, if you have 3 other companies, you will find areas that were missed in a project. You'll see that one company missed this particular cost, but this other company missed another cost. You'll be amazed at how much you learn just by going through one deal and having 3 bids scoping out the same project. And that'll give you a lot of perspective on pricing, what you should be building, and so forth. All right, the next thing, of course, is always have a third-party company that is professional doing all the construction draw process. Now, this is a requirement when we're lending money on a deal. But I will tell you that I, Rick Malero, personally made this mistake with a builder friend of mine because we had a relationship. I bypassed this process. I gave him a draw, and guess what? He couldn't complete the project. So who gets stuck? I do. Why did I get stuck? Because I put myself in the process of having a third-party company be the bad cop, making sure that what this guy said he was going to do is going to get done. And so I would make sure that each and every one of you, when we're dealing with a client, you use that as an educational piece to say, look, this has nothing to do with you or us questioning your integrity. This has everything to do with us making sure that your contractor is going to perform what they said they're going to perform. And this is a step that, whether you like it or not, if I'm loaning you money, you're my partner. And now on every deal that I build, I don't care. It's going through that same process with a third-party company because that's what protects me and the investors that entrusted us with capital. Does that make sense? And so again, I'm giving you, these are the key fundamentals to make sure. And then lastly, you always want to have a contract with your builder. It is imperative that we have a written contract with a builder. And so obviously you want to make sure that an attorney reviews it so that it's a favorable contract that protects you. In our company, we already have some templates that we use both for contractors or the builders, but when you're dealing with a more sophisticated builder, they will send you a full proposal breaking down everything along with their legal documents. So we just have our, okay? So again, this was a very important piece that I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of, and hopefully this will also give you the understanding of when we're lending money, why we're asking for these things. We're not doing it because we're bored and we want a couple items on the list. We're doing it to make sure that if we fund this deal, it is going to be successful both for the borrower and for our company. Everybody with me so far? Just want to make sure. All right. Now, as a lender, if we're buying the property, obviously, generally, we're funding 100% of the project. Why? Because it's our deal. We own it. We control it. We'll close it. But you will see that this is why third-party institutions that buy from us are only comfortable with a certain number of parameters. Now, well, like I said before, while this program is currently not active, we're only building a few homes internally, the reality is this is why we have a specific breakdown of the guidelines that we look for. So for example, this is why we only want to build homes from 75,000 and not to exceed 1.5 million. Why? Because we want to make sure that we're building homes that are going to be affordable, that are going to move quickly. Anything below 75K is a risk when you're building something new. Anything over 1.5 is far beyond your affordable housing, and it could cause an issue for you, right? And we want to be in and out of these deals. We generally look up to 18 months because when we're working with a deal, we don't want to develop the land that could take 5 years. We also put a timeline because we want our borrowers to understand that they should have most of their pre-development diligence complete before we get into funding them so that we can be in and out of this deal as quickly as possible. We only shoot for 1 to 4 units because we're sticking to residential, because when you get to commercial building, it's a completely different world, completely different process, right? FICO score is more, it's just more to make sure that the person we're dealing with has a decent score because we want to make sure that they're financially stable, okay? And as far as the loan to values, this becomes a major issue for us because what we really want is to make sure that the actual borrowers have skin in the game and that we don't exceed a risk level of 65% of the after repair value. So what does that mean? That means that when we're funding a deal, typically we want to make sure that the full completed home is worth basically 100%, which means we're not going beyond 65% of that value. And it also means that we're not going to lend more than 75% of the cost. What does that do? It guarantees that, let's say Michael is building this home, that Michael has 25% of that project cost out of his pocket. So if something goes wrong, we're equally aligned with a potential loss, and he's going to be more likely to do whatever he has to do in order to go ahead and pay us off, okay? Now, when we're looking at the land, there's also some components. Again, if it's unpermitted, you'll see that the most we can do is 50%. And then, of course, when it is permitted, we can offer more because we know that those steps have already been taken in place and we're truly protecting ourselves and our investors. And also, another key important thing to say is any money when we're funding construction is generally going to be held in an escrow account, so we do it based on draws. We will never just give an investor all the money because we know what happens when that happens. All of a sudden you have delays, you have issues, we've seen it, we felt it, and we don't want to do it again. So with that said, I just wanted to show you that when we go live again in the future, when this thing is back up and running, you now fully understand the picture of why within those 3 stages of construction, you have to know what you're doing. You have to understand how we're building and connecting with the right builder. And now you understand why we're offering certain terms to mitigate our risk and to protect our clients. That is really what it comes down to. Now, as a company, when we're doing our deals, like the deal we're doing in St. Petersburg, I have another one in Georgia we're working on, and potentially we'll see what happens with the one in Orlando. Those construction projects, we're still in essence dealing with the same process we're treating ourselves. We want to make sure, are we at 65% of the value? Do we have the right builder? Are we making sure that the money's in escrow and we're hiring a third-party company? These are all the processes that we're adapting as a company to mitigate the risk. And it's the very reason why we're teaching other clients and you guys about this process so that we don't make those same mistakes and we don't allow investors that are pushy to dictate terms. Because at the end of the day, those that push generally have no idea what they're doing. And they're pushing out of ignorance. And it is your goal to develop this knowledge so that you're the leader, you're the mentor in that relationship when we're financing somebody to go vertical. So with that said, guys, this concludes the step. I'm going to leave it with one last quote. There's two specific quotes here that I want you to look at. Excuses are the nails used to build a house of failure. I'll read it again. Excuses are the nails used to build a house of failure. And here's the second quote. A successful man is one who can lay a firm foundation with the bricks that others throw at him. So I'll leave this with you. The choice is yours, which one of those quotes you become. You can make a bunch of excuses and literally ensure that you nail your failure, or you can turn all the negativity into a stepping stone for you to be successful. There is nobody else in this room, nobody else in your place that has the power to decide whether you succeed or you fail other than you. It's your choice. So I'll leave you with that thought. All right, we're going to open it up. Any comments, questions?
Just wanted to address the fact that we're still not offering new construction, so please don't get it twisted. I don't want to be getting 100,000 inquiries about new construction. We'll let you guys know once we do.
Oh, that was great. And made me smile. He's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Closing there, but again, for sure. Again, we're not doing that for third party. We're doing those internally right now. But when we go back and we expand, the whole idea is that you fully understand why we look at these things, why we're asking for these conditions, because we're not doing it because we're bored, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And it'll come back, guys. There's a huge shortage of housing throughout the country. And now as new information is coming back for housing, even picking up now, the sales prices as of we're matching same value, same prices as last year on this date. So we can already pass that bottom from the months of March, April and May, and we're starting to climb up, which gives confidence back into the marketplace. So these will come back eventually. Just hang in there.
Absolutely. Awesome. Any other comments, questions, concerns? All righty, then I'll take your silence for excitement. So before I forget, guys, I'm gonna ask you guys for a favor. Actually, it's not me, it's Dayton. He's trying to do this whole social media thing for us, and he's doing a great job of putting it together. So I'm gonna ask you guys, if you could, please turn on your cameras. And then our team, just get around here behind me. All I see is a finger. And then Dayton, you can take a picture. Wait, okay, cool. All right, cool. So we'll just do a fake. Lamb, anybody, just put a picture of yourselves and then we'll just, there it is. Hey, Tosh. There's Daniel, I mean. All I see is a fan for Lem. I'm a fan of you, bro. Hey, for the record, I think you guys will laugh just to make everybody smile. But did you guys know that Lem is famous? Yeah, I went to Chick-fil-A and I got a cup and it says Lem on the lid. The cheesy stuff I sent to him too.
Wow.
Good luck, bro. How's it going, Christoph? Tom, can you show your video, bro? Or look at this, you got pros over here. Damien, can we see at least a picture of Ireland? It is way too soon for that. Way too soon for that. But yeah, smile.